Hi, everyone, and welcome to this Vervo webinar. I'm Dom Hennequin from Vervo's marketing team, and thank you for being with us today. Today's session is going to run for about half an hour, and a recording will actually be sent to you afterwards and to those who couldn't attend. So be sure to kind of keep up with that, and feel free to send it on to people who couldn't make it, who you think might be interested in this topic. We'll also be taking questions in the chat throughout the session today. So if you've got something to say or something to ask, pop it in there and we'll try to address it before the end of the session. Today, we're exploring the topic of why skills matter more than degrees. Since the early 2000s, the amount of jobs requiring 4-year college degrees has ballooned to unprecedented levels, a trend that has particularly affected middle skills jobs that usually require more than a high school diploma, but less than a college degree. As of 2021, less than 7% of the world's population actually holds a bachelor's degree, according to the BBC, which means that if you shut out, which means that if you require degrees, you're basically shutting out a huge selection of candidates in your hiring process. And new data from the American Student Association and Jobs for the Future shows that 80% of employers believe that they should be prioritizing skills over degrees, but the majority of Gen Zers and employers still plan to earn or use degrees, respectively, to help them be hired or to hire. So there's clearly an appetite for change, but something is holding people back from embracing hiring for skills over degrees fully. So how do we confront this and change hiring for the better? That is our topic today. That is the question of the day. And to help us explore it, my guest, Cristian Sirera, who is the Senior Manager of Corporate Partnerships at Opportunity at Work, an organization that is leading the charge on skills-based hiring, is joining me to discuss. Cristian, thank you so much for joining us on this Vervo webinar.
Thank you, Dom. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Firstly, what are you drinking during this webinar today? Is it some sort of, you're joining us from Chicago. What have you got? Have you got water? Have you got coffee? Is there something special that they do in Chicago that I don't know about?
Yeah, they do plenty of special stuff in Chicago. It is currently 5 p.m., so I am currently drinking my 12-hour-old coffee from this morning. So super special, very good. I live in Chicago, but I'm from Spain. So, we're not like the Italians. We put milk in our coffee, so it's coffee with milk. And then the last thing is that I'll stick to the coffee because, I'll show you this, but my bottle of water, and I just realized this sounds like a seal. So I'm not going to be doing that. So I'll stick to the coffee.
Boy, I'm glad that we're recording this webinar. That was fantastic. Okay, well, you heard it here first. Chicago coffee is coffee that just sits in the pot for 12 hours with a bit of milk. Great. All right, let's get into it. So I guess the first big, broad question to start with is, are degrees overused in hiring?
Absolutely. This is, you mentioned 7% of the world population holds a 4-year degree. In the US is about 40, which you would expect it to be higher than the world's population. But, as a service economy, it certainly isn't as high as some people think. And so when you look at the fact that about 3/4 of all jobs posted in the past 10 years in the US, which is where Opportunity at Work, the organization, the nonprofit organization I work for, and with post most of their jobs, they require a bachelor's degree. And so if you look at 75% of all jobs requiring a bachelor's degree, only 40% of the workforce of roughly 150 million in the US have a 4-year degree, then the math just doesn't work. And so at the end of the day, it's through the past 40 years, it has become a catch-22. There's a lot of employers who have placed a bachelor's degree required in their roles. They've seen these pipelines come through. Success has come through these workers doing the work and doing well enough. And because of it, they're looking at it to continue the process, a process that is familiar, that is efficient to them, of this pipeline with this accreditation and this skill set is doing well, so let's keep it going. So they are overused and they are on the rise, and it's a problem.
Yeah, it seems like degrees have been, a must-have thing in job applications for forever, probably as long as I've sort of been in the job market. But is this actually the case? Was there a time where it was actually more about skills, or there was some other way that was used to choose the best candidate? And has it turned into something where it's just sort of, this kind of thing that seems like, I don't know, conventional wisdom that you have to have a degree for this role or that role, and there's no questioning of it?
I mean, you and I both in our early 20s. We haven't been in the labor market nearly enough to see this, but as we exited the manufacturing economy and went into service, it just became that way. And so there were jobs where you needed skills to work on a plant, building cars or something of the sort 30, 40 years ago. As white collar jobs came more and more, and service jobs came more and more into it, as we started to manufacture overseas, you started to see these guardrails being put in place, especially with the explosion of the internet and the fact that it wasn't anymore about somebody coming to your office with a resume, right, and saying, hey, I would like a job here, and I have this experience, and can we have a conversation? And the HR teams had the resources and the time to be able to have that conversation, or even a phone call. It became, how do we manage the amount of applications that we have, and how are we able to to sort the perceived top talent? And so that's where things like bachelor's degree, with the explosion of education, that assumption of bachelor's degree being how you trim to the top, came to be. But there's jobs in the past 10, 20 years that stars, those skill through alternative routes that we call, those are the 70 million out of the workforce in the US who don't have a college degree, who have the skills for higher wage occupations, but because of the bachelor degree requirements, they do not have access to these jobs. There were jobs that stars were performing 10, 20 years ago. Nurses and accountants and customer service positions that in the early 2000s, even certainly in the 90s and 80s, they were able to perform. As these pedigree requirements came to be and came into the frame, then that's where they dropped off. And 20 years later, there's been about 5 million stars who've lost opportunities for these jobs. They would have held these jobs or have access to these jobs for the past 20 years, and now they're stuck in positions with lower wage access because of the fact that they just cannot even be in the conversation. And so our argument at Opportunity at Work, or one of our arguments, is, well, stars have been able to perform this job for decades. You then put this guardrail, kick them out. If you are able to relax those pedigree requirements, then stars will be able to perform these jobs again.
Yeah. So to you then, and your organization, does it seem to be that degrees are relied upon by hiring managers and organizations as a way of shrinking the shrinking the talent pool, or kind of removing candidates quickly from the hiring process to end up with the most qualified?
Yeah, absolutely. We are not saying an Opportunity at Work, we're not saying that a degree is not a good way to get into a higher wage job. It's a great way, and for the past several decades, there's been a lot of proof points that have proven that it is a great way to go to college, get a nice job that pays well, and then do well. What we're saying is that it shouldn't be the only way for you to be able to access these jobs. And so it is, because at the end of the day, hiring is hard. We have to acknowledge the fact that these hiring teams are bombarded with applications, and regardless, even in this tight market or perceived tight market that we're seeing, I wonder why. Probably because you're not accessing the full pipeline, right? You have to work across a computer. You have to utilize ATS systems and be able to rely on things like algorithms, perceived red flags around lack of pedigree, lack of or gaps in employment, and finding creative ways first, and now proven ways, to be more efficient around your pipeline. And so at the end of the day, when you do that, then you do narrow the pipeline into a pipeline that is specifically pedigree with skills, but you're leaving behind, as I mentioned, it is literally half of the workforce, 70 plus million stars, skilled through alternative routes, who have the skills. Of course, as a lot of these ways usually go, you are also cutting most of the diversity at the table. Most of the non-white workers in the U.S. are stars, over 50% of each of these demographics. And so when you cut this through and then you look back at your remaining pipeline, then you see employers turn around and go, well, where's my diversity, right? Well, guess what? You left it behind about 17 steps ago. So you need to go back and see where you've left it and actually find ways to include it back in.
I guess, you've got the diversity question, but you've also got the competency question, right? I mean, how often do degrees and the skills needed for a job actually truly align? Like if someone has a degree, is it actually, predictive of job performance?
I mean, it depends on the degree itself. I would argue that, if you want to do open heart surgery, you probably need to go to school and need to learn and be in an environment where you can be trained before you go live. And there's not really, we haven't really done the research in our insights team. There probably aren't that many skills that transfer into open heart surgery. So there's specific jobs that you need to be, you need to be in an educational environment to be able to learn. But, a degree can help you determine a few things about a worker that you're potentially considering for a job, and that has to do around the ability to just stick with something and see it through, to be trained and coached, to perhaps have a working knowledge already on a sector or an industry, right? If you're working on sales or something like that. But skills, the argument is that they should have the same weight. And so the funny thing is that we look at a degree and we say, okay, there's a specific set of skills this person likely have. Well, what if we look at the actual skills that somebody without a college degree has? And so, again, we're not saying that a college degree is not a great way to get into these jobs. We're just saying that skills should have the same weight. And the labor market is antiquated. So we are not prepared to be able to look at skills, but that's where we're trying to work with this ecosystem, with the labor market, across workforce partners, across companies, to be able to rewire the labor market. That's our mission, to be able to get the 70 million plus stars to learn and earn and work in these higher wage occupations that they know they can do.
It's interesting that you bring up the kind of, to be a surgeon or something like that, you probably need to have some sort of degree or accreditation. And I suppose that testing out that hypothesis would be quite a risky thing.
Yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that.
Send someone in there with no degree to just have a go at it and see, all right, well,
that didn't work.
Then you do need a degree. But with that said, how your organization is leading the charge on trying to figure this kind of stuff out and figure out how those stars can get more opportunities, and I suppose how to educate the job market that it is possible to, be skilled in a lot of different ways, and figuring out how that easy ways for them to consider those people without degrees or without the right degree, and find a way to still assess their skills. How do you test and build out the findings of that sort of hypothesis by, like, how are you approaching that kind of research? Is it you're looking at many different job markets or job types and seeing how people have, built up the skills for them in alternative ways than degrees, and then assessing them side by side with someone who has gotten a formal qualification in that mark? Like, how are you collecting that kind of data?
Yeah, so a lot of the work has to do with the first couple of years that we existed as an organization. We understood that we needed to tell the story of stars, and so at the end of the day, there wasn't a lot of data out there around what our stars been up to in the past, several decades. Where do they have where have they honed their skills, and how have they been able to navigate the labor market? And so we have a lot of insight, and we've put out 3 reports that have to do with where stars are now, where they've learned and earned their skills based on sectors, based on roles, and also the ability to utilize those skills, regardless of how antiquated the labor market is, to actually drive into jobs that get them to that higher wage occupation eventually. And so a lot of the work has had to do initially with the research to prove the point that stars, and roughly 5 million of those 70 plus million stars, the work that they've done to get to those higher wage occupations, regardless of the labor market. And so we've done a lot of that work. We have the story to tell. We have the data behind it. And now the next step, and the step that has occurred through the past couple of years with corporate partners that we work with across the US, had to do with, okay, well, how can we utilize that information to be able to have conversations with our strategic partners, with our corporate partners, but also with partners across the entire labor market, with SMBs, with anybody who wants to look at stars and say, how does that look like for your own roles? Are we actually looking at the skills needed for your set of jobs that you want to try to relax accreditations needed and pedigree needed for stars, and actually translate this job description that could have been around for 5, 10 years. Nobody's touched it. They've just been posting it. It's been working, right? Everybody gets it's getting hired and succeeding and moving on. Are we looking at skills? If so, can we have a conversation, and we can help you with that through our insight and through our actual teams. And then can we have a skills to skills conversation? And so that usually then has to do with us working with employer partners in some way that involves maybe StellarWorks, our marketplace platform that translates skills, that provides an intelligent matching from skills from these jobs that employers need to fill to skills that stars in the market have, as they literally bring their own skills to the table into this platform. And then you're doing an apples to apples comparison. And, to your point earlier, we don't compare with a college degree pathway and those skills. We're saying, again, that is another pathway for that same job. But just like you have a college degree strategy and a college recruitment strategy, you should have a STAR strategy. And that's where we can help.
Right. So it's kind of additive rather than, it's a clear alternative. Yeah, interesting. And what do you find is the most, like the best way to incentivize that? Is it kind of look around, you're wondering why why you've got no diversity? Here's what could be affecting that. Or is it, where are the candidates? Well, let me tell you, you're discounting and cutting a whole swath of candidates out of your hiring process by, an unnecessary barrier. Maybe rethink that, and you'll widen your pool. What works?
What usually works is looking at roles where you can attract stars. At the end of the day, when you look at skill through alternative routes, for the most part, they are employed and they are in positions, stuck in positions where they are not making, as much as they should be making because of their skills. And so if you're able to bring out opportunities that pay, for the most part, $20 an hour or more, where there's upward mobility for these roles, where they can drive up to a destination, what we call a destination job, that actually pays more based on the skills that you're learning, and you continue to provide upward mobility for these stars to go up. Why would you go to into the labor market when you can drive up these stars and other workers into these destination jobs? If we're able to look at that, and we're able to look at which roles are attractive for stars, now you're actually putting out the signal to stars to say, we as an employer are looking for stars. We're looking at skills. And so you are free to look up from your job that you've been stuck for years because the labor market wasn't working for you, and actually start seeing these companies and start seeing how they're putting out the signal to say, we are hiring and looking for stars. The argument that we try to make a lot around, the promises that we make when you do that, it has to do with, you're not going to be able to find everything you need right away the moment you turn the signal off, because the labor market has disenfranchised stars for decades. And so it's going to take a while for workers to stop thinking in terms of, I'm stuck in this job, or stop thinking in terms of, I need a college degree, or am I going to get to anything like this, and start to see actually, oh, okay, we're actually seeing opportunities for somebody like me who has skills only, quote unquote, and not a pedigree to get into these jobs. So it's going to have to do with putting in the work, with finding opportunities that are attractive for stars, committing to it, and actually continuing the course at the same time that you're doing any other recruiting that you're doing, until the labor market is effectively rewired and stars are able to access those opportunities, including all the diversity that a lot of employers are missing.
Yeah, a holistic kind of approach, I guess. So there's a survey I mentioned before by the American Student Assistance and Jobs for the Future that 80% of employers believe in prioritizing skills over degrees, but the Gen Z teens and employers, they continue to default to requiring college degrees. Um, what does that say about the job market today? And I guess with everything that you've just sort of said, how much work is involved in sort of rewiring all of that, and potentially sort of like the culture of the job market?
I mean, Dom, honestly, I think about this a lot. We may be doing work that our kids and the kids of our kids benefit from to an extent, at least at scale. And so we need to be able to come to terms with the fact that, at least in the US, this is something that's systemic, that's been happening for a long time. And we just need to put the building blocks for that. And so, to my point already, that goes back to the signal. If employers start to put out the signal, and that is the main point of our national STARS awareness campaign that we're launching next month, the paper ceiling. We're launching a national campaign with the Ad Council, right? The Ad Council, This Is Your Brain on Drugs, Smokey the Bear, the DARE campaign. So everybody pretty much knows it, probably internationally as well. And so we're launching a campaign to say, this is a dual campaign to bring stars their own talent category, so they own it, so they understand that they are no longer going to be spoken of in a deficit of what they don't have, and that is a degree, but rather be told, you have skills, you have the value to actually get into these jobs, so own your own talent category, speak to your skills. And the same for employers. Put the signal out there so the stars start to see that there's different ways in which they can find opportunities. But because there's no confidence right now in the labor market, Gen Zs are going back to, I don't want to be the one to be the brave soul who doesn't get a degree and then tries to make it through with just the skills and maybe some certification and whatnot. It's hard, and so it's on both sides, but it needs a strong signal from the employers to say, we are going to be looking at stars regardless of the market, regardless of how tight it is, regardless of the great resignation in COVID. Even when things are good, you still are looking at stars. If you start talking about that, then you're actually, you're in business. And the funny thing is that, it's crazy how ingrained this need for a college degree to do well. And, this happened last week, but my daughter, who's 7 years old, started second grade last week. And so she does the chalkboard that says, what do I want to be when I grow up? And she put an architect. She wants to be an architect. It used to be a gymnastics teacher because she's doing gymnastics. Now it's an architect. So we're going with that now. But so I asked her, and she told me, because why do you want to do it? She said, because I want to build things. And she asked me, do I need to go to college? And I said, well, for an architect, probably you do, yeah. But then I just said, but you don't need to go to college no matter what. Like, you can find other ways to do what you need to do to be who you want to be, right? It was inspirational, but I wanted to say that. And then she said, I want to go to college. And I said, okay. And I asked her why. And she said, she's a 7-year-old. She said, because then I have a plan. And so what kind of culture are we in that a 7-year-old already understands that if she goes to college, quote unquote, she has a plan? If she doesn't go to college, then it means that she doesn't have a plan. And so there's a lot of work to be done, and it just means that we need to be strong in our approach to rewire the labor market together. And that includes enterprise companies, it includes SMBs, it includes stars themselves on their own talent category, it includes the workforce and talent development partners in the country, and everybody working together towards a solution that could be showing up at scale in 10, 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. 7 years old, already planning to go to college. Talk to me about some solutions. So what are some alternatives to using degrees as an indicator of, performance and skills in hiring? Are there qualifications that you can earn in a broad swath of, industries that can fill that gap for hirers at least?
I mean, yeah, you obviously you have trade certifications. You can earn to become an electrician, to become a carpenter. You can be a physical therapist. You can do certifications at work, right? You can become a project management, a PMP, right? You can do a supply chain certification. You can do things to further your own path as it's perceived by the employer or the sector. Of course, you have the tech sector who, they've been so smart to say, how do we module this in a way that anybody can go in pretty much from entry level and actually have access to our sector access to our jobs, regardless of their previous experience or pedigree. But regardless of the ways in which you can skill up, which you can improve your skills, I will always push that as a labor market, we just do not know enough about so many sectors to be able to say a pipeline of 70 plus million folks need to skill up to our standards. Other than the tech sector, I would say that there's a lot of work to be done to truly understand how many skills are needed for specific jobs that account for millions of occupations in this country or millions of job openings in this country. There needs to be an audit and an alignment to what does it mean to do this job, how many actual skills you need, to which proficiency. And then once you know that, then you can go back to the workforce and say, we need you to scale up in these three sections. But without doing the work yourself, you're just saying, scale up to my perceived need of skills based on the needs that I have right now. By the time you're scaled up, by the way, these may have changed. So I may be asking you for something different. And so it's a little tricky to say, that the workforce needs to scale up unless you've done some of that homework. And so that's a lot of the work that we also help employers do, to kind of stop first and say, okay, can we look at the skills needed for these positions first and actually test the market to see if stars can do the jobs right now?
Yeah. And with that said, what are the best ways to assess skills for employers at the moment? And you can feel free to mention Vervo here, but I'm not. It's okay.
I mean, it's you can find ways to assess skills. Vervo's one of them, and I actually spoke with your CEO at JFF Horizons, and I was really happy to hear that this is a holistic approach to actually looking at the real skills needed for a job, and then assessing appropriately. It isn't just it isn't some sort of boilerplate thing that you use to kind of to I guess validate the perceived needs of an employer. And so at the end of the day, you can assess skills by going in and into the job description and actually looking at whether it's in-person testing of skills, whether it's online, whether it's through talent developers and workers who are working with these talent developers, and yes, getting accreditations, but also finding ways to validate their own skills. You can assess skills separately, but at the end of the day, you need to assess the job and the skills that are needed in order to align it to something. The other thing that kind of gets in the middle of it is that there is a big need to assess skills, but when there is, say, an entry-level job or with a few months of experience needed for a college degree entry-level job, assumptions are made because this person went to college. And so I would say that at the same time, I would say that the skills of a star should not be more harshly scrutinized than the skills of somebody with a degree. And so at the end of the day, if you are looking at specific skills, you're making assumptions that you're going through the interview process and trying to confirm those assumptions based on that person's pedigree and skills through the interview process, and then post hire. Did this person have the skills they say they had? We're going to make an investment in this person and then see. When it comes to skills, a little bit more tricky, and you really want to make sure that this person has the skills. I would say that you should be in the same situation. Make assumptions based on the skills this person says that they have, based on the experience they have. Try to confirm it through the interview process, but certainly don't be harsher in terms of proving those skills than somebody who went to college and says, I have a degree. A degree from where? How did you get it? There's many ways to get a 4-year degree. I think we all know that. I'm not saying be harder on those. I'm saying if assumptions are made, they should be made across the labor market, regardless of the person's profile and skills.
Okay. So, and we're going to wrap up here in a few minutes. So if anyone needs to run off, there'll be a recording of this. So with that said, then, are you saying that, it should be, if you're going to assess skills and provide that sort of entry point, as well as take into account degrees, should it then be all the hiring approach is the same across that job, where it's skills first, rather than, oh, you've got a degree in this, so we're going to make a bunch of assumptions based on your, based on that sort of certification. But for everyone else, we need to see their, and verify their skill level, that's the wrong approach.
Yeah, I would argue, and I know that to an extent, a lot of the work that you do has to do with assessing those skills, and you can certainly assess for a specific set of skills that will land you the job. But when it comes to the level to which you need to make sure and ensure this person has what you need, I certainly see it more strenuous when it's somebody with skills versus somebody with a degree. And so all I'm saying is that, you know, assumptions are made. So let's make some assumptions, and then let's let the labor market test it out. Let's see what stars can do with these skills that they say they have, and then by all means we can set up more guardrails. But let's include everybody back in and actually look at skills, and then and then see how that goes.
Interesting. All right, got a few more questions for you, and then we're going to wrap up. I guess, like, how hard is it for, from what you've seen, for hirers to transition to that and incorporate or completely transition to skills-based hiring? And is it something that, it only can really work for a certain category of jobs, or can it go all the way to the C-suite? Can we be hiring surgeons one day just based on skills?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the last one. I'm sorry, I'm not going to.
It seems to be the one that's like off limits. Yeah.
No. I mean, there's corporations like Gap Inc. who are saying that anybody below C-suite can be a star, can be somebody without a bachelor's degree. So again, there's companies and sectors out there that are saying we just haven't tried enough. So let's not make assumptions, right? We haven't tried enough, so let's try it out. But when it comes to actually transition to skills-based hiring efforts, I think it needs to start with the C-suite. It needs to start with a mandate to say, are we willing to stick this out? Are we willing to, as I mentioned earlier, regardless of the market and regardless of how attractive it is for us as an organization to hire stars, because there's a lot of folks out there who we cannot access anymore because the market is so tight. Are we willing to stick through it regardless of where the economy is, regardless of where our needs are in hiring? And so once that's done, once the mandate is in and it has permeated through the organization, then you need to make sure that you're following through with the hiring teams, with the folks in HR and talent acquisition, to make sure that this is pouring you through. You can't just tell teams that we're now going to be hiring for folks with a bachelor's degrees, because they will just revert back to the path of least resistance, and that is going to probably including everybody in the pipeline, but still going to the folks they perceive to be top tier, and those are for the most part bachelor's degrees. So this is where having resources allocated for change management and making sure that teams are being educated on how to identify stars, how to hire apples to apples, skills to skills, but then also how to look at skills inside of your own organization and give them opportunities for upward mobility, so that you are not just hiring skills at the lower level, or hiring stars at the lower level rather, and they're not moving up because of the lack of degrees. So there's a lot of work that needs to happen internally, and that is again constant. So it's a combination of executive sponsor, the stuff that you see in the news that somebody has pledged that they're going to do X, Y, Z, but then continuous resources to make sure that the teams who hear about this mandate are actually enabled to succeed.
Yeah. And I guess picking up on that, what does the skills-based hiring process look like more in terms of, if you're going to incorporate in transition to skills-based hiring, do you put some sort of skills test right at the beginning of your hiring process? Do you make it a part of many things? Do you still involve resumes? Do you still involve reference checks?
Oh my gosh, reference checks. That's a whole 45-minute conversation. But no, I think it needs to be kept simple, and I think simple for hiring teams who have been hiring very specifically for the past 40 years. It has to do with job descriptions, and so go back to those documents, get them out of the application process before you post again, and just look at them and say, do they need to be updated? Are you looking at the full list of skills needed? Have you added more, like a lot of employers do, just because you want to get the quote unquote best? And is there other ways in which you can include more of the pipeline who could potentially do this job? Are you catching yourself ways? Which are the ways in which you're catching yourself shrinking your pipeline? It really is good for business for you to be able to dip into the whole pipeline of the U.S. market, and so, or any market for that matter. So catch yourself. Which are the ways in which you are, chopping out the pipeline by adding this or that? Is this something actually needed for the role? And the HR team that's making this decision, are they actually talking to the business unit that actually holds that role? Are they having a conversation around, regardless of what I learned about this role, even a year ago, is it different now? Do we have performance on the other side in this actual team that have performed that maybe didn't have this entire full list of skills? If the market is so tight, are we willing to, I wouldn't even say upskill, but rather just train post day one of hire, because we want to catch folks with these 75% of these skills and we're willing to train for the other 25, therefore amplifying your pipeline. There's ways in which you can look at that job description and actually look at which are the skills needed. And then it's a combination of the skills assessment, it's a combination of platforms like StarterWare, the combination of the things that are coming up that are going to need, just back to my earlier point, to be utilized. You need to provide feedback. You need to utilize them daily on your hiring processes. It is something that we're very much working together to rewire together. It is not going to be as easy and perform as effectively from day one as the process that has gotten us here for the past 40 years, but it is something that we all understand needs to be done. So.
Yeah, it's a transition. Finally, for people watching today, where can they start in making this transition? What's some actionable things that they can sort of start thinking about or start doing today that'll set them up for more of a skills-based hiring approach than hiring based on degrees?
Well, first they should really just have a conversation around, are we willing to do the work to hire inclusively? Hire inclusively is something that gets thrown out there all the time. And so are you willing to do the work and go through the pain that is going to come with doing something differently for a little bit? It's going to hurt a little bit. It's going to sting, but it's okay. And then just look at easy possibilities for job openings that pay over $20 an hour in the US market, that are going to attract the attention of those 70 plus million stars that could do that job, so that you're not stuck to the folks who, may not have a job, may not have the skills that you need all the way out. Tap into the entire pipeline by providing opportunities and not knocking down the wage or the attractiveness of the role because all of a sudden that doesn't require a degree. And so if you're able to do that and actually test the market and work with partners like you or us who are able to work with you on actually deploying these opportunities into the market, now you're actually starting to look into the response of the market to your signal, to your supply signal, and then you tweak from there, like what worked, what didn't work. If you post 20 roles and you don't find stars, is it because stars aren't there? I would argue that with 70 million plus, there's probably somebody who can do that job who doesn't have a degree. So what needs to be tweaked? How can we put the signal out there better so that stars are actually able to look at that? And so again, it has to do with surrounding yourself with the right partners and being excited about this change, understanding that it's going to hurt a little bit. And then the last thing I would say is, selfishly, for the opportunity at work, I would say go to the paperceiling.org. And that is where our campaign is launching next month with the Ad Council. Because something that we're doing with the 30-something, 40-odd partners, corporate workforce partners that we are launching this campaign with is, what are the top performers in the inclusive space doing? What are the partners like Accenture, like Walmart doing for both the hiring of stars and the upward mobility of stars, so that other companies can actually see that and replicate it. If it's working for a specific set of roles within an industry, feel free to have access to it and replicate it yourself. And at the very least, it will provide you inspiration to actually find ways in which you can do the same.
Great. Really good actionable tips there. A good first step to take for everyone. So thanks for that. Look, that's all the time that we have today. Thank you, Cristian from Opportunity at Work, for joining me. Do check out Opportunity at Work, everyone, and those resources that Cristian mentioned as well. And we've also got a heap of articles and guides on what hiring based on degree has done and ways, and alternatives that you can use around it to move towards more of a skills-based focus. Look, we're going to send out a replay of this webinar later today, and that replay will also be available on the landing page of this webinar that you're registered at from here on out. So if there's anyone that would be interested in this that you think could could find a lot of value in this session, do share it with them, and they can watch it whenever they like. Stay tuned for more webinars ahead with Vervo. We'll be sending out some new invites soon, so do sign up to our email. And until then, enjoy your week and bye.
It was a pleasure, Dom. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Christian.